The chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. Good morning and welcome to today's hearing entitled From Lab to Market, a review of NSF Innovation Core, I-Core. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. The purpose of today's hearing is to review the National Science Foundation's I-Core program and its goals of preparing scientists and engineers to extend their research from lab to market. The hearing will examine the successes and challenges of the I-Core program, and the committee will hear recommendations from the future of I-Core and its roles in the innovation ecosystem. And research labs today are the seeds for breakthroughs in new fields like quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and bioengineering, breakthroughs that will continue to transform our lives and the world we live in. Many scientists and engineers are not trained for commercializing those ideas because most did not go to business school or take any business development classes as part of their training. So how do we give them the tools to be successful entrepreneurs? How do we help scientists and engineers turn their innovations into products and services? In 2011, NSF established I-Core to help fill that need. I-Core is a national innovation network of 8 nodes across the country which connect academic researchers with the private sector and trains them to be entrepreneurs. NSF funds teams of researchers to go through a 7-week I-Core curriculum that provides a real-world, hands-on, immersive learning experience. Today, I-Core is taught at 86 colleges and universities in the U.S., and over 1,000 teams have been through the program. I welcome Dr. Dawn Tilbury, the new Assistant Director for Engineering at NSF, to discuss what NSF has learned from over 5 years of running the program and collecting data and information. We are also fortunate to have Mr. Steve Blank on the panel, the architect of the NSF I-Core curriculum. He will explain how his approach trains scientists and engineers to be entrepreneurs in a short period of time and his vision for the future of I-Core. We also have on the panel Dr. Dean Chang from the DC area I-Core node to discuss the innovation ecosystem in the Virginia, Maryland, and DC region. The 10th Congressional District, which I represent, has a robust and growing technology sector, while Virginia, DC, and Maryland boast some of the top research universities in the country. I look forward to learning how I-Core contributes to building connections between academic researchers and the private sector to create more companies and more jobs. Finally, I look forward to hearing from Dr. Sue Carter on her experience participating in 3 I-Core teams and creating successful companies. Through research and activities like I-Core supported by NSF, we have the opportunity to boost our economy, enhance our national security, strengthen our cybersecurity infrastructure, and create a STEM-ready job workforce. Not a small task, and we appreciate your role in all of that. And I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock, and Chairman Smith for holding this hearing. It's a hearing that I have been wanting to have for a number of years. I'm glad that we've got here, and as everyone knows, I've spent a lot of time on this committee talking about the Innovation Core or I-Core. So I'm very pleased to be holding this hearing, the first one we've had since we had a field hearing in Chicago back in 2012 on I-Core. I'd like to think that 2012 hearing helped win over some of my more skeptical colleagues at that time. The program was in infancy back then in the summer of 2012, having been launched by NSF in 2011. Now we are 7 years in, and the program has not just grown and expanded at NSF, it has been adopted and adapted by several other agencies, including NIH, DOE, and even DOD. While I helped build support in Congress to see I-Core funded and expanded, agency, university, and national lab leaders alike embraced the potential and worked hard to implement it as effectively as possible. As a result, we are starting to see exactly the kind of outcomes that we hoped for back in 2012. Over 1,000 companies have completed a national I-Core course, and we're seeing many of the alumni go on to start successful businesses. There are some notable research institutions who started creating a culture of entrepreneurship decades ago, such as MIT and Stanford. There are many more universities, both public and private, that have actively sought to learn from and implement many of the best practices from those pioneering universities. Unfortunately, many of them have had a hard time securing the funding and the right expertise to successfully undertake these efforts. There are also some institutions of higher learning that have simply not made this a priority. We know that institutional culture is a hard thing to overcome. Our world-class research institutions around the nation excel at conducting cutting-edge research and educating the next generation of scientists and engineers. There is fear among some that promoting entrepreneurship would compromise the important basic research mission of these institutions. I believe there's plenty of evidence to the contrary. It is clear that students and faculty across the country are eager to see their research breakthroughs further developed into commercial products and processes for the benefit of society and our economy. In addition, because we now graduate far more PhDs than we have faculty jobs, entrepreneurship provides a viable career option for the more than 50% of PhDs who will not be able to pursue academic careers. With a very modest investment, I-Corps helps address the lack of funding from the private sector to develop entrepreneurial capacity at institutions of all sizes and types. It also helps to strengthen the SBIR program, shift institutional culture, and ultimately pay the American taxpayers back many times over in the form of commercialized products that would otherwise collect the dust on a laboratory shelf. By the end of an I-Corps course, participants make the go, no-go decision. Those that decide to go or to start a company have some market research to back up their decision. And those that either pivot to a new idea or choose no-go save themselves the effort of starting a company that would have been likely to fail. Just a few examples of companies that have developed from teams that participated in I-Corps training at the University of Chicago in recent years are Conduit, a company that speeds up the development and improves the quality of software for Internet of Things devices, Qualia Health, which makes a health assessment and monitoring app, and Clustra Bio, which is developing therapeutics to combat food allergies. These companies are all making very real contributions to our economy, job market, and well-being. And these are only from one site out of many around the country. I remain a committed champion of this program and never cease to be amazed by how successful it has been and continues to be. But we can't rely on past successes to keep I-Corps strong into the future. So I plan to introduce new legislation very soon to expand upon the I-Corps authorities already in law. My bill, the Innovators to Entrepreneurs Act, will open up I-Corps courses to participation by many more entrepreneurs than are currently taking advantage of them. Currently, the nodes that teach these courses are operating below capacity, which is a missed opportunity both for their faculty and for the companies that could be taking advantage of their training. My bill will also direct NSF to offer a new course that goes beyond the current I-Corps curriculum to focus on how to attract investors and grow a business. Since 2011, we've learned that the I-Corps curriculum does a great job of teaching aspiring entrepreneurs how to do customer discovery and vet their ideas. But once they decide to start a company and begin the commercialization process, it doesn't teach them how to take the next steps, like how to develop financial projections and build a winning team. Some of the same visionaries who developed the current I-Corps curriculum recognized this need and developed a new pilot course they've been calling I-Corps Go. The results so far have been promising, and demand for this type of training is high. Therefore, my bill directs NSF to develop I-Corps Go into an official I-Corps course and to offer it nationally to interested companies through the nodes that offer the current curriculum. I hope my colleagues will take a look at my bill and agree to co-sponsor it. I also want to make sure that I mentioned the great job that NSF has done with I-Corps over these years in the work that they continue to do. And I want to welcome Dr. Tilbury in as leading the engineering directorate. So it's good to have you there at NSF in this position. I look forward to discussion, and I yield back.
Thank you, and I now recognize Mrs. Johnson for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Comstock, and good morning. I appreciate you holding this hearing, and thank you for the expert witnesses for being here this morning to share their insights with us. The research carried out at our nation's universities and national laboratories creates the foundation upon which our entire innovation economy is built. However, in order to benefit society, the science must find a way out of the laboratory. These societal benefits may be varied. Science itself, across all fields, serves as inspiration for the public and a tool for educating the next generation of scientists and engineers. Science can also be used to strengthen our national security or to inform better and more effective policies for the public good. However, sometimes a scientific development holds the promise of new commercial products or process. And that is where the National Science Foundation Innovation Core, or our core, programs have the biggest role to play. Unfortunately, the path from the laboratory to the market has rarely been smooth or easy. While the challenges are sometimes technical, they often are cultural and financial. Scientists and engineers trained to be academics speak a very different language than business people. Too often, as we will hear in today's testimony, this leads to researchers spending extensive time and money developing technologies that nobody wants to buy. Even when the idea has a well-defined customer, the private sector may be unwilling to invest until the concept is more fully developed. Over the last several years, the National Science Foundation has been a leader in addressing the cultural barriers impeding commercialization, while also making small investments in the proof of concept work. The iCore program stands out as an example of the excellent return we can achieve on a modest investment when we implement and scale up proven practices. When NSF launched iCore in 2011, some of my colleagues were skeptical about the need for an appropriateness of having this program at NSF. Many in the university community were concerned that the program might harm NSF's core research mission. I believe there has been a sea change in the response from the university community that reflects the pent-up demand from researchers, the dedication of NSF staff, and the clear benefits of this program. So as a result, this is one little program that may be helping to transform the entrepreneurial culture at universities well beyond the initial expectations. I hope my colleagues also see the benefit of this program and remain committed to supporting it. And I hope my colleagues also remain committed to supporting the long-term foundation of U.S. science and technology by continuing to invest in our research agencies, including NSF. I look forward to today's discussion, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Now introduce our witnesses today. Our first witness is Dr. Dawn Tilbury, Assistant Director for the Directorate for Engineering at NSF. She joined NSF in June while maintaining her appointment as Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at the University of Michigan. A professor at Michigan since 1995, her research interest is in the area of control systems, including applications to robotics and manufacturing systems. She received a Bachelor's of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from the University of Minnesota, as well as a Master's of Science and PhD in Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences from the University of California, Berkeley. Mr. Steve Blank, I now recognize Mr. Lipinski to introduce this witness.
Thank you. Steve Blank is an adjunct professor at Stanford University, a lecturer at the University of California at Berkeley, and a senior fellow at Columbia University. But he is perhaps better known as one of the godfathers of Silicon Valley for his prolific blog and books on innovation, entrepreneurialism, and how to run a startup, including the 4 steps to the epiphany in a startup owner's manual. Going back a second to the blog, steveblank.com, I recommend The Secret History of Silicon Valley for everyone to take a look at the role that the government played in really creating Silicon Valley that a lot of people don't know about. Steve has won numerous awards, including honors for his teaching at Stanford and Berkeley, and appears on the Thinkers 50 list of the world's top management thinkers for several years running. Steve helped develop I-Corps, drawing on the principles of the lean startup movement, which he helped launch in Silicon Valley. He has since started other innovation and entrepreneurship programs, including Hacking for Defense, which was federally authorized in the fiscal year 18 NDAA bill, and works to solve urgent problems for the Department of Defense and intelligence community. Through his work with the Armed Services and intelligence agencies, he has helped advance the concept of dual-use products, those that may be developed for defense applications, but can also be sold commercially and attract private capital. Steve hails from Pescadero, California. It's good to have him here today.
Thank you. And now our next witness is Dr. Dean Chang, Associate Vice President for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the University of Maryland and Lead Principal Investigator of DC I-Corps. Prior to joining UMD, Dr. Chang spent 15 years in Silicon Valley, where he served as the Chief Technology Officer of Immersion Corporation. He holds over 40 U.S. and international patents. Dr. Chang earned his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from MIT, a master's in business administration from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and his PhD in mechanical engineering from Stanford. Dr. Sue Carter is our final witness, and she is professor of physics and a director of the Center for Entrepreneurship at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She also serves as the director of the NSF I-Corps site in Santa Cruz. Previously, she worked as a research staff member at several companies and served as the chief technical advisor and scientific founder at 4 startups. Dr. Carter holds 6 patents and 1 patent pending. Her research focuses in film technologies, biosensors, solar energy, and agriculture technology. Dr. Carter earned a Bachelor of Arts in Mathematics, Chemistry, and Physics from Kalamazoo College and a PhD in Chemistry from the University of Chicago. I now recognize Dr. Tilbury for 5 minutes to present her testimony.
Chairwoman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, and Ranking Member Johnson, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to participate in today's hearing on the National Science Foundation's Innovation Corps, or I-Corps. My name is Dawn Tilbury, and as mentioned, I'm the Assistant Director for Engineering at NSF. The NSF I-Corps program started through the convergence of several trends in the economy, in the understanding of startup formation, and through NSF's experience with seeding startups through the SBIR and STTR programs. I-Corps was adapted from Steve Blank's Lean Launchpad course at Stanford University. Steve's course provided lean startup training to NSF scientists and engineers so they could quickly determine whether their technology or product had commercial potential. I'm very pleased to see Steve here today. Thank you for your leadership and support of this important program. I'm also pleased to see Dr. Dean Chang from the University of Maryland, DC, and Virginia node, and Dr. Sue Carter from the University of California, Santa Cruz. You'll hear from them shortly. The purpose of I-Corps is to accelerate U.S. innovation. It leverages results from fundamental science and engineering research into translational activities of potential commercial and societal benefit. I-Corps helps scientists and engineers gain entrepreneurial skills and identify valuable product opportunities that can emerge from academic research. Each I-Corps team has a technical lead, an entrepreneurial lead, and an I-Corps mentor. During their intensive training, the I-Corps teams determine whether they have a viable product or service with a fit in the market. At the end of the training, if the answer is yes, teams have a clear understanding of the next steps to move their technology into the marketplace. Those steps could be to pursue licensing their technology or to launch a startup. By addressing the challenges inherent to the early stages of the innovation process, NSF investments strategically strengthen the innovation ecosystem in the USA. To help accomplish this, we draw on many partners in that ecosystem. Academic institutions play a critical role in I-Corps, as does the private sector. Technology developers, business leaders, venture capitalists, and experienced entrepreneurs serve as mentors, sharing their knowledge and expertise with the I-Corps teams. This network enhances the ability of NSF-supported researchers and their students to turn scientific results into potentially successful technologies. Since our first cohort of 21 teams in 2011, the program has expanded across the country. I-Corps now has 8 regional nodes involving 28 universities and 86 sites that provide infrastructure, resources, networking, and training to move scientific discoveries from university labs into the marketplace. The I-Corps model has been adopted by 9 other federal agencies and the state of Ohio. The National I-Corps curriculum has trained more than 1,000 teams to date. More than 450 of these NSF I-Corps teams have created startups. Although I-Corps constitutes far less than 1% of the NSF annual budget, recent data shows that I-Corps teams have collectively raised over $250 million in seed capital. For the team members, it has been truly transformational to think in a more entrepreneurial way. I-Corps is a way to unlock the economic potential of creative ideas in American colleges and universities generated by NSF investments. To lay the groundwork for future expansion, NSF has 2 pilot programs underway. First, we are funding 8 I-Corps sites to increase participation and promote inclusion of underrepresented populations in entrepreneurship. These sites will pilot novel approaches and partnerships to engage differently abled individuals, first-generation college students, racial and ethnic minorities, and women, as well as minority-serving institutions. Second, in collaboration with the NSF, SBIR, and STTR program, we launched the I-Corps for Phase 0 pilot. This pilot supports non-academic teams that are developing game-changing technologies. The Phase 0 teams receive national I-Corps training and participate in a follow-on curriculum called I-Corps Go that addresses some of the more common issues in startup formation. As we look to I-Corps' next 5 years, we see continued urgency and motivation for the program. Several studies suggest that U.S. startup rates have not fully recovered from the Great Recession. With NSF-supported researchers continually creating and developing cutting-edge technology, we see the I-Corps program as a key tool to help with our broader goals to increase American innovation. Thank you for your interest in this program and for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Mr. Blank.
Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock, and thank you, Ranking Member Lipinski and Ranking Member Johnson. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this hearing. 6 years ago, the NSF recognized that scientists who received government commercialization grants were having a real hard time getting to the next step of raising private capital. And so the genesis of this I-Corps program is pretty simple. First, figure out why this was. Why were scientists having a hard time getting private capital? And why were they having a hard time building successful companies? And once we figured it out, then can we teach them the skills that they were missing? And it soon became apparent that they were having a hard time raising money is that the scientists simply couldn't speak the language of private capital investors. University scientists believed that just having innovative technology was enough to make a successful business. The reality is that's just plain wrong. Great technology is just one part of a successful company. Private investors, venture capitalists, and angel investors needed to hear more than just the technology. To speak to VCs or angel investors, scientists needed to learn things that weren't in their PhD program. They needed to figure out how to turn their innovations in the lab into products that people actually wanted to buy. They had to figure out who their customers were going to be and how the product would be sold. They needed to talk to regulators and understand patents and licensing issues and understand how to create customer demand. How much would it cost to make their product, and how many would they sell and what price? In the past, when a scientist started a company, they'd write up all these answers to these questions, put it in a business plan, hire the people, build the product, and only find out years later into the company that their assumptions, their guesses, what the customer wanted were wrong. Now, I-Corps starts with the premise that on day one, all an entrepreneur has is a series of untested hypotheses, which is a fancy word for they're just guessing, about each part of their business. We teach I-Corps in a way that's pretty extraordinary. When we teach scientists all the theory about starting a company, we also make them get their hands dirty by having them get out of the labs and test their hypothesis by talking to 10 to 15 customers a week. And they use the feedback from those customers to improve multiple versions of their product. By the time the class is over, they've talked to over 100 people. We now know the I-Corps method of teaching scientists to get out of the building and talk to people turns theorists into capitalists. And our scientists actually love this I-Corps learning process because what they're doing is actually running the scientific method, this time with potential customers rather than test tubes in a lab. So when you hear the phrase, I-Corps is a bridge to private capital, you know that means that we teach our best scientists to learn a new set of skills that help them raise money to build companies. And these are companies that could create not just new products, but new jobs, and not just in Silicon Valley, but in districts like yours. Now, having spent 21 years building companies, my first instinct was this type of education should be done by existing private incubators and accelerators, not the government. However, our observation 6 years ago is still true today. While the NSF-funded technologies can turn into future companies, most don't fit the model of grow into a billion-dollar valuation in 3 years that private incubators and accelerators are looking for. The teams that I-Corps teaches require the patience and long-term vision that the NSF brings. NSF-funded scientists and engineers are working on what we call deep tech, really long-term, geeky technology like new material, new devices, outside of the mainstream of social media and smartphone apps. Yet for our country, turning these innovations into products might have the biggest payoff. We now know that without I-Corps training, most of our advanced technologies would never turn into companies. There's one other thing about these deep technologies that's becoming more evident. Many are potentially dual-use technologies, meaning they have potential commercial companies, but their products can be also used for the Department of Defense and our intelligence community to keep our country safe and secure. So America is better for having I-Corps. It's made turning our government-funded science into companies more efficient. We should do more of I-Corps. We can make it broader and better, reaching more people and teaching more skills. First, keep in mind that today I-Corps is for university scientists funded by the NSF. But if you're outside a university, you can't take this class, and that's a shame. Since we now know we have an effective program we ought to share with all Americans, not just the few in universities. We ought to open the I-Corps to innovators and entrepreneurs who have ideas in every part of the country, whether they're in a university or a garage that aren't yet ready for private capital. The second way to make I-Corps better is to improve on what we've learned over the last 6 years. One of our biggest learnings is that even after teams have been through the I-Corps, they need to learn additional skills, like how to hire and build teams that know how to sell and market the product, how to grow and scale a company, and how to find investors who want deep technology. NSF is currently testing this follow-on class, as you've heard, called I-Corps Go. I hope everyone in this committee is proud of the I-Corps program that you've created and supported. It's one of the programs that continues to make America great. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairwoman Comstock, ranking members Johnson and Lipinski, and distinguished members of the House Science Subcommittee. I'm greatly appreciative of the opportunity to testify and engage in a discussion with all of you about the NSF I-Corps program. My name is Dean Chang. Sometimes it helps if I clarify that Dean is my name, not my title. I'm the Associate VP for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at University of Maryland. And we've already heard a lot from my fellow witnesses about the lab-to-market impact that I-Corps has had. So as a lead principal investigator for the NSF I-Corps node for the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, we like to call it the DMV node, I'd like to use my 5 minutes to highlight 2 specific areas of impact of I-Corps. Area number 1, the impact of I-Corps on the regional and national level, and area number 2, the impact of I-Corps on undergraduate education. Area number 1, NSF has created a national innovation network with 8 I-Corps nodes across the country. What is a node, you might ask? Well, nodes are basically charged with rallying and marshaling together the many universities, investors, entrepreneurs, and industries in our geographic regions and getting everyone to work together as one. It's my observation that this has been one of the hallmarks and most impactful contributions of the NSF I-Corps program. In the past, critical startup knowledge of what worked and what didn't often lived in the heads of a few expert individuals. Most universities didn't have easy access to these individuals, and that's really all changed now with I-Corps nodes. Here in the DMV node, we have built up a strong bench with over a dozen I-Corps instructors from University of Maryland, Johns Hopkins, Virginia Tech, George Washington, Howard University. Once or twice a year, NSF sends us about 25 teams for the national I-Corps training. But the rest of the year, our dozen I-Corps instructors continue to teach in various versions of the I-Corps program throughout the region to 200 teams each year. And those instructors even travel to other schools to provide this I-Corps training to teams from George Mason, from University of Virginia, Virginia Commonwealth, Morgan State, and even outside the DMV to schools in Pennsylvania and North Carolina. This means that a team from just about any school in our region can get access to any instructor from our node. For instance, if you're a team from Morgan State, you now have access to our instructor from Johns Hopkins, who specializes in life sciences, our instructor from Maryland, who specializes in virtual reality, augmented reality, and UAVs, our instructor from Virginia Tech, who specializes in DoD-funded companies, or our instructor from George Washington, who specializes in international markets. And this picture I paint for our DMV node is the same at the other nodes as well. In the Midwest, the University of Michigan collaborates with Purdue and University of Illinois and other schools in that region. In the Southeast, Georgia Tech does the same with universities of Alabama and Tennessee and other schools in their region. And the same for the nodes in the Northeast, the West Coast, the Southwest. So this national innovation network of nodes created by NSF really has an all-for-one and one-for-all sense of community across the regions and across the country. Area number 2, the curriculum and methods in the national I-Corps training are also being widely integrated into undergraduate education. At the University of Maryland, key components of I-Corps training have been incorporated into over 50 courses, reaching over 7,000 students each year. One of those classes is a senior capstone course in bioengineering, in which students spend the year working with doctors to design medical devices. Before incorporating I-Corps into the course, some beautiful devices were designed and manufactured with little regard to validating a business model. Now the students spend time in customer discovery and learn how improved healthcare also requires purchasing, reimbursement, regulatory, and other issues to be part of any successful business model. 2 students in the course, Sean Greenspan and Stephanie Cohen, said, quote, I-Corps finally put us on the road to real customer discovery. Our initial business plan started with an incorrectly identified buyer, value propositions that were wrong, and guesses everywhere else. Fortunately, after 67 interviews, we now have a developing revenue model. We still have lots of work to do, but we now know where our answers lie, outside the building. Sean is now working at Palantir Technologies, and Stephanie works for a spinal surgical implant company. And both Sean and Stephanie cite I-Corps as a formative experience that gave them the essential skills to be able to accelerate technology into the market, skills that they are both using in their jobs today. Many of the over 100 colleges teaching I-Corps have similar stories of the impact I-Corps is having on undergraduate education. In conclusion, I-Corps has created a significant culture change across campuses, both among students as well as faculty. Faculty who go through the National I-Corps training get connected to the tremendous resources of the National Innovation Network and come back eager to apply I-Corps principles to their entire research portfolio as well as to their teaching. That, in turn, better prepares and better equips students to make an impact on the economy and in society, whether it be at a startup, at a large company, or even at a nonprofit or in government. Lastly, one of the things that made I-Corps so successful has been the flexibility for I-Corps nodes to experiment and innovate with the I-Corps program itself. In I-Corps, we push scientists to go beyond their comfort zone to find the unexpected opportunities. So we need to continue to push ourselves out of our comfort zone to keep making I-Corps better. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. And now we'll hear from Dr. Carter.
Thank you. Chairman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski and Johnson, and members of the subcommittee, it's an honor to appear before you today. My name is Sue Carter, and I'm a 3-time participant in the NSF I-Corps program, and currently run the NSF I-Corps site at the University of California, Santa Cruz. In addition, I'm a physics professor who has transitioned basics research out of the lab into startup companies 3 times. Consequently, I can provide you my experience with NSF I-Corps as a student and teacher of the curriculum, and as a faculty member and entrepreneur. The strength of the NSF I-Corps program is that it pushes researchers to get out of the lab and into the community to talk to potential customers, enabling them to better understand the societal value, or lack thereof, that their research has. For me, as a faculty member, the insight has resulted in doing much more impactful applied research. Similarly, as an entrepreneur, the NSF I-Corps program has resulted in me spending substantially less time and money to get a product to market. Let me provide a few concrete examples. I have been a principal at 4 startup companies, AdVision, Selection, Soil Culture, and the Irish Science Academy. The first 2 companies are before I had NSF I-Corps training, and the last 2 are after I went through NSF I-Corps training. At AdVision, we raised over $6 million in funding, both from strategic partners and government grants. We used this funding to develop a printable organic gliadamine diode technology to meet commercial specs given to us by our partner. But we never fully identified a customer for the product, and thus we ended up selling the company to Sumitomo, a Japanese company. If I had had the experience of the NSF I-Corps program, I believe we could have identified customers much earlier on and grown AdVision into a US-based company that could have been a leader in organic gliadamine diode technology, creating hundreds of US jobs. At Selexant, we raised over $30 million in venture capital funding. This funding was focused on developing a thin film solar cell technology and building a manufacturing line in Oregon. However, yet again, we failed to identify a customer and value proposition for the product that was developed, which ultimately led to the manufacturing facility never being built. After burning through much of the initial multi-million-dollar investment, the company was taken over by new management who understood that the value that we provided to our companies was the low-cost manufacturing process that made the solar cells to our customers, rather than the solar cells themselves. If we had the experience of the NSF I-Corps program, I'm confident we would have come to the correct product decision 2 years earlier, enabling us to direct the initial $30 million to ensure U.S. solar industry's leadership in thin film technologies, rather than losing much of this market share to China. The 2 companies I started after NSF I-Corps resulted in us being able to sell a commercial product to customers with much less time and funding, namely less than $2 million in the case of soil culture and less than $10,000 in the case of the Science Academy. The efficiency directly resulted from our many conversations with the potential customers and key partners that the NSF I-Corps program largely forced us to do. While it's too early to know how many jobs soil culture will generate, its pathway to selling commercial product was many years faster than my 2 previous companies. Needless to say, I'm convinced that the small cost of the NSF I-Corps training pays for itself many times over in reducing startups' time to market. For startups that receive funding through the SBIR or STTR program, which I've also received funding from, this also gives U.S. taxpayer money. This also saves U.S. taxpayer money, as it allows the principal investigators to use the funding much more efficiently to develop a technology that someone is willing to pay for. Given my positive experience as a faculty member in the NSF I-Corps program, I decided to offer the curriculum to students at my university through a summer entrepreneurship academy. While only a few of the students going through the program actually start companies, the training has proven invaluable to students as they seek employment after they graduate. Students have come back to tell me that this is the most valuable course they took at UCSC and received their job offer because they had taken the I-Corps course. Understanding how to listen to your customers and make changes to a product so that it fulfills their needs is important in almost any job, but something that academia is very bad at teaching students, as we find ourselves sometimes stuck in the echo chamber of a university. I want to conclude with how the program can move forward to better benefit students and entrepreneurs. So I'm running out of time. I'm going to basically say that I'm a strong proponent of I-Corps Go, that is expanding our training so that students can learn how to talk to VCs, how to form teams, and how to understand the legal context behind their startups. The other major issue is that the training is largely limited to students, faculty, and their mentors. So I'd like to see the program open up to our entrepreneurs, many of whom are likely to be willing to pay to take the course. I know I would have been. Some of our top young entrepreneurs receive funding through the SBIR STTR program, so that might be an excellent vehicle to expand the offering. So, Madam Chairwoman, this completes my testimony, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Well, on that note, then, I think what I'd like to ask, how are some, we have community colleges, we also often have weekend programs that are adjunct, I know like the Darden School does at UVA, So George Mason, lots of our universities have that capacity to do that. How could we implement this program with them, and are there any limitations right now to doing that?
You want me to address that? Well, I mean, I can tell you right now that there's nothing that limits us from working with community colleges. I have a lot of community colleges in my area, and I include those students in our curriculum. So it just involves building a network and reaching out to those colleges. So I don't think there's any limit at all.
Or in since we were talking about people not even having to be in a curriculum, but just having a facility where they can go so they can get the program.
Right.
Is that,
Yes.
Okay. And Dr. Chang, do you want?
Sure. So I kind of alluded to this earlier that we've got this great bench of over a dozen instructors who have worked at startups, who have this experience that we're talking about and teach in I-Corps. And when they're not teaching in the official NSF I-Corps cohorts, we put them to work to go to other schools in the region or even outside the region. And what we've seen is that partly solves this problem. So we can offer cohorts on the campus at UVA or wherever else to help those help the teams there. But long term, what we really need to do is kind of like what NSF does with the national program of train the trainer, so that somebody at UVA or somebody, actually they have pretty good capacity already, but some of these schools can develop their own people that can continue to teach it more often. They know their own campuses better. They know what resonates with their faculty and what's going to get them to come to increase participation as well. So, Train the Trainer has been a centerpiece of the national program, and it's a point of emphasis in the regional programs and needs to continue to be more of a point of emphasis among regional programs.
And by doing that Train the Trainer program, you really could then have a self-sustaining program wherever they have done that, because I know at UVA, for example, the Darden School makes money for the school, is my understanding.
Yeah.
So if they're able then to attract and people can, go and do that there or other universities.
Absolutely.
It's a money generator that would support the whole education program.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit on one of the key challenges, I'll say, but we're seeing some successes in that the universities that can offer this kind of training need to figure out a way how they can continue to provide it, not just as volunteer work. So if it can be sustainable, if there's this business model, whether it's like Darden's executive education model, or even partnering with economic development agencies, whether it's Virginia Center, CIT, or Maryland TEDCO, the state economic development agencies, if they fund some of these programs for these instructors, now you've got like this self-sustaining ecosystem, which helps the economic development agencies because the money, the grants, the investments they make into their companies are going to pay off, be more likely to pay off if they've had this I-Corps-like training. So we're starting to see some of that, but formalizing that is really critical.
I was going to add one more thing here. I mean, at UC Santa Cruz, we actually started the course before we actually had the funding, so I had to come up with a way to fund it. And the way we did it is it's actually part of our it's a course that students can take to fulfill their requirement for graduation. So it's, they pay tuition and fees. It counts as creative, believe it or not. It's focused on, it fills our creative general credit, and so students can take it to help them graduate with their degree.
And then as part of sort of the whole regional innovation ecosystem, what other places could we plug this in? Because I'm thinking we have sort of, throughout my district, we have sort of startup areas, but what I hear from young people who want to leave here and go to California or Colorado or someplace where they feel is a little bit more startup friendly, that there's more sort of just like, say, your local chamber or your local county government has sort of these centers where you can go and have that type of innovation ecosystem. Is there a way, there's nothing preventing us from plugging that into whatever type of startup center or innovation center that you might have in your area, right?
Yeah, absolutely not. In fact, I think one of the real valuable things about doing the customer discovery that we've all talked about, going to talk to customers, is sometimes you might find that the only viable customer might be in a different location, in which case the prudent thing would be to go there. But oftentimes you might find there's some customers right in your backyard that you never knew about, and it wasn't until you got out of the building and talked to them, understood their needs, that you realize that there's basically this gold mine in your backyard that you never really investigated. Absolutely.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. And I now yield to Mr. Lipinski for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I wanted to, in some ways, sort of follow up on that with the question of how can this help? How can I-Corps be leveraged for economic revitalization in areas that we're talking about doing this in areas that are already doing pretty well, especially if you have a big university. But how about economically depressed regions of the country? How could this have an impact? I'll start with Mr. Blank.
Well, Congressman, I think that's a great question. But if you remember, not only there are 8 nodes, there are 86 sites across the country that now teach the I-Corps class and methodology. And many of them are in communities where their past clusters, whether it was manufacturing or other past 20th century industries, have collapsed. And now, for the first time, this can be a seed around this college and university of training entrepreneurs that don't have to go to Boston or New York or Silicon Valley to actually stay in their local communities and start building companies. And as Dr. Chang mentioned, these universities and colleges are figuring out how to partner with their own regional economic development organizations to actually get the capital to scale to the next level. And so what we've started to see is I-Corps as kind of the rejuvenation of innovation and entrepreneurship in places that historically have just been bypassed in the last decade or so, and we're kind of proud of this consequence of the program.
Can I
Dr.
get?
Tilbury?
Yeah. Okay.
I would just add that the I-Corps teams come from almost every state in the country. So even though the nodes there's 8 of them and 86 sites, as he mentioned, there are teams coming from almost every corner of the country, and they can take the learning that they had in the I-Corps program back to their home district to start their company, if that's really the right place for it, as was mentioned.
Thank you. Dr. Carter, do you want to add something?
I wanted to say that University of California, Santa Cruz, it might sound like it's near Silicon Valley, but we're actually sitting in the middle of Salinas Valley. We have the highest youth crime rate within an hour of us. We also are one of the highest poverty areas in California. So we're a Hispanic serving institution. So we're mainly servicing those students that are underprivileged and have had very difficult circumstances growing up. We have a lot of first-generation students in our programs. And I would like to say that in terms of diversity, STEM diversity, I see more diversity in I-Corps than I do with our science engineering classes. I think that the first-generation students, the students that don't have the privileged backgrounds, realize how important it is for them to learn entrepreneurial skills, to be able to create their own jobs, and so they are very much attracted to those courses, more so than the standard STEM students who just think they're going to go get a job in Silicon Valley and they'll be done with it, right? So I think that this is a way to actually get underrepresented minorities involved in STEM careers.
Thank you. I want to ask about the, well, I'll just say, obviously, one of the strongest arguments in favor of I-Corps, it's transformative. You have a small amount of government investment in education yielding huge results in terms of the ability of participants, learn entrepreneurship, attract follow-on funding, hopefully achieve their, and some have certainly achieved their commercialization goals. So expanding the program, I want to ask Mr. Blank, how do you think that the expanded curriculum would be similarly transformative?
Thank you, Congressman. One of the things we've now learned over 6 years is that this program does a spectacular job of teaching scientists things they thought they could pre-compute, like who the customer should be and how do I price it and where we sell it. And as for the previous 30 years, we discovered, no, you can't pre-compute that without getting out of the building. And now that we got them to understand who customers are, we realized that the next step is teaching them how to actually raise money and build teams and actually turn this into a scalable company. And that's, after we've kind of raised the bar, we just realized we need to raise the bar again. And the NSF has pioneered these prototypes of I-Corps Go classes that I think are doing just that, to actually accelerate these teams to the next step in commercialization. And I think this is spectacular for the country. I should also mention, by the way, this I-Corps curriculum has become the gold standard not only in our federal research agencies, but now in the DoD and intelligence community as well. It's now being adopted in almost every agency and across the world as well. Just an amazing program, and kudos to the NSF.
Thank you. Time's up. I yield back.
Thank you, and I now recognize Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. Mr. Blank, I heard another definition of hypothesis. That is a wild guess carried out to 2 decimal places. But Dr. Tilbury, I had a question. I'm from Central Florida. We have the University of Central Florida. They're one of the sites. And are all of the sites universities?
Yes, I believe all the sites are universities, but they serve the broader population of their region.
So are they usually housed in some one or more colleges of that university, or are they housed in a separate center, or how does it usually work?
I think it depends on the university. It could be housed in, say, the College of Engineering or the Vice President for Research, or even a Center for Entrepreneurship if there is one at the university. I don't think there's a standard.
So there's no real, there's just a framework, but not a big
It's a
guideline,
framework,
yeah.
and each university who applies to be a site talks about what niche they intend to fill with their site and how that will work for them. Maybe Dr. Carter could talk about, she has a site at UC Santa Cruz.
Okay, well, let me ask you something. Dr. Carter, is yours external to the university or a separate entity?
Ours is internal. Ours is actually under the Division of Graduate Studies, which means it can represent all the disciplines equally. But we also work with undergraduates too, even though we're in the graduate studies.
Before you got the grant, did you have a similar program or something that would be a cousin to that ongoing?
Not exactly. We had some starting pieces of it, but we do not have any business school or law school at University of California, Santa Cruz. So this is basically the training our students get to launch their businesses. So the funding really helped us. We wouldn't have been able to do what we did today without that funding.
So, but if there were some things you were working that would kind of be a cousin to that, did those remain, or did you just begin focusing on?
They remained.
They did?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the governance of it.
Sure. So in our case, we have I'm the director of the center. We have an executive leadership board, which has all the deans from the campus that oversee what we're doing, and also we have a faculty advisory board that contains faculty and staff that advise our program. And then underneath us, we run about 4 different other entrepreneurial sites that we're kind of the framework, but there's centers focused on social and creative entrepreneurship, on STEM-based entrepreneurship, on art-based entrepreneurship, and we help those 3 programs also, providing them the instructors they need to run their courses.
So is the teams, I guess you have more than one team, are they led by a faculty member?
No, they are advised by a faculty member and a mentor. So I have an open door policy. Any team that wants, I meet with all the teams regularly to give them advice to how to move forward. I set them up with mentors that they may need to get help. If there's another faculty member that I think can help them, I will send them directly to the other faculty member, or sometimes it's a staff member. We make sure we meet with them regularly and they get the resources they need to move their thing forward.
Dr. Tilbury, is there a cutoff point where, okay, there are these teams, they're working on an idea, they want to turn it into a business, they want to be entrepreneurs. Is there a cutoff point or some way where you decide that it'll either happen or it won't happen? Or is that done by money, just you can't get any money, or what?
So the I-Corps training, the formal training is about 6 weeks. And at the end of that 6 weeks, each team should have a decision. Yes, we're going to go ahead and commercialize the technology, or no, it's not ready yet. we need to go back to the lab and improve it, I mean, for it to be ready, or there's really no customer who's interested in this, so we
So the
should-
team could start all over with a new
They-
idea or a
They
modified
could
idea?
absolutely start all over. It might, but rather than starting the company and investing a lot of money to find out that we've developed this product that there's no customer for, it's better to determine that within this boot camp, this 6-week time frame.
I'm familiar with the University of Central Florida a little bit and
Mm-hmm.
their program there. It's a pretty awesome thing, and they're trying to train entrepreneurs. A great thing. I'm
Great.
supportive. By the way, they're the only undefeated Division I football team in the country. Yield back.
Okay, and I now recognize Ms. Estee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock and Ranking Member Lipinski. And I want to thank the 4 of you for joining us today on this really important topic, which I see as critical to U.S. competitiveness and to diversification of our STEM workforce. And those two things are related. So I want to say that I'm proudly from Connecticut, where Accelerate UConn is, in fact, one of these nodes and is already proving to be incredibly successful. And in fact, I was pulled out by our local contact from the Department of Commerce to talk about some of these issues and more things we need to do in our state to better link the world of work and the world of commerce, as Mr. Blank talked about, with what's happening in the lab. So I wanted to, Mr. Blank, you talked about something that I think is really important for Americans to understand, and frankly for a lot of my colleagues to understand, the critical role that I-Corps is playing in that deep tech. I grew up sort of in the Silicon Valley area, and I think there's still a lingering assumption here that that's what's happening now in Silicon Valley, rather than the dramatic change that's happened with the chase for unicorns and a fast turnaround, so that without government support, not only for basic research, but government support and help to guide the scientists who are engaged in that deeper tech. So for example, what intersects with DARPA, or what intersects with other parts of the military. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yes, Congresswoman, that's in fact a great insight. You know, in the 20th century, venture capital, that is investors in Silicon Valley, and national interests actually were pretty well aligned. We invested in medical technology, we invested in computers, we invested in things that actually made the country better, safer, secure. In the 21st century, I will contend they're unaligned. Venture capitalists can make a ton more money than investing in short-term, you know, Bitcoin investments or smartphone apps or social media, which are great for their investors, but one could argue that the money would be better spent on other things like genetic editing for healthcare or applications in other places. And this unalignment has really created kind of a gap between what gets invested in that requires patience and long-term vision. And in fact, the few agencies in the country that do that, one of them is the National Science Foundation, that invests in what we call deep tech, that requires long-term investment and patience for basic material science, basic healthcare at the NIH, et cetera. And I think this Innovation Corps program is part of that deep vision, deep patience, and long-term investment that just private capital does not do anymore.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Dr. Tilbury and Dr. Carter, you should know that actually Chairwoman Comstock and I earlier this year had bills signed into law promoting Women in Entrepreneurship Act, and really wanted to focus a little bit on the particular role and importance of something like I-Corps in diversifying our STEM workforce and ensuring, because we've found that women in the STEM fields and women generally are having more challenges making that leap into the entrepreneurial space, fewer mentors, less access to capital, and that I-Corps is actually playing a really important role. And Dr. Carter, you talked about the difference that made in your own experience. Dr. Tilbury, could you expand a little bit more systematically of what we've learned? Because I think Dr. Carter's testimony speaks to the reality of what it meant for her in getting that training.
So absolutely, at the National Science Foundation, we're absolutely committed to broadening participation in all aspects of science and engineering, and in particular in the I-Corps. So some of the pilot sites that we've started are focused on broadening participation. Some of them focused on including more women in startup companies. Some of them focused on including underrepresented minorities or even people with disabilities. And they have unique vision into what the needs are for women, for disabled people, that can really have an opportunity to create very successful companies. So we feel this is a good investment. It's still a pilot, but we're looking for good results to come out of these investments.
Dr. Carter?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that, you know, women are generally attracted to solving problems that affect their communities. And so I think this is a natural fit to bring women into the STEM fields and to get them included in our entrepreneurial ecosystem. So I see it. I mean, we're trying to hit 50% numbers in our programs for women entrepreneurs, and I anticipate that we'll hit that.
Thank you. And the last thing I wanted to mention again, Mr. Blank, you talked about the hands-on entrepreneurship, and I think that is so critical. We've learned for students, hands-on learning is the best. Hands-on science learning works better, but taking that same insight and translating it into entrepreneurship, I think, is something we need to remember that I-Corps is championing, and we want to support you in any way we can in these endeavors. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you, and I now recognize Mr. Marshall for 5 minutes.
Yeah, well, good morning. Kind of running back and forth between a couple committee meetings as usual for us. So thank you for your testimony. So proud of what you all are doing. One of our jobs in Congress is always to figure out what's working well and to reemphasize this. And I was able to take the chairman of this committee, Chairman Smith, to Wichita State University and share with him some of the things happening on their innovation campus as well. So very proud to see how this is working. I would just like to hear a few more positive stories and give you all a chance just to share positive stories of how this is happening, and maybe to start with Dr. Tilbury and go down the line. A great real story that you would share.
So I can tell you the story of one of my colleagues, Professor Avtar from the University of Michigan, Mechanical Engineering. So when he started as an assistant professor, he got his NSF Career Award, which is for junior faculty. And then he got another basic fundamental research award from the engineering directorate. And he developed a new way to kinematically remap your hand movements into the end of an end effector for remote surgery. Purely mechanically, no electric controls required. So he got an I-Corps grant and started a company, and then got an SBIR, and built this company that's building these medical devices, very low cost, very safe, to be used in multiple dimensions. And now I'll be happy to say he's back on campus and got another fundamental research award. And so we'll see if he, now that this company is launched, we'll see if he develops another new technology. We're very excited.
Well, great. I keep telling everybody that innovation can do more to drive the cost of healthcare down than any piece of legislation we can write if the federal government would just get out of their way. Mr. Blank.
Yes, Congressman. I'm going to give you a story, probably one that doesn't get told often, and that's about failing fast. One of the great things about the I-Corps program is that it's hard to avoid bad news because it's in front of your face. Our best example is when we taught the class at UCSF, University of California at San Francisco, for life sciences, the chief of surgery of UCSF said, well, I'll set up a team too just so I could act as a role model for my students. And he had an invention that he had been working on for 3 years in the lab for hernia repair. And Dr. Hobart Harris said, well, this will be pretty easy. I'll just get out of the building and I'll talk to the other surgeons. I've been working on this for 2 or 3 years with my co-surgeons. Obviously, everybody will love this. The third week of class, he comes back and his face is pale. He said, no one else wants it. And in fact, at the end of the class, he said, you know what? This isn't a viable commercial technology. And he still, after 4 years after the class, is proselytizing the fact that not only can this help you build a company, it could also help you not waste years of your time and tens of millions of dollars of both government capital and private capital.
Thanks. Yeah, Dr. Chang.
So I mentioned the bioengineering class earlier, but I'll give another story that also ties into engineering. But starts with research. There's a professor named David Tilley in our School of Agriculture, really innovative research, and he went through a introduction to I-Corps program that we offered locally. Saw, wow, this is how I can explore whether I can apply my technology out in the marketplace. He went to a national cohort in Texas. That was about a year ago. They've launched a company. They've since gotten follow-on funding from the Maryland State Economic Development Agencies. So all the things that you'd like to see. But the big sea change for him was also that he wanted to apply this throughout his entire research portfolio and get his other colleagues in the School of Agriculture to also be looking for applications and applying to I-Corps. So he's actually teaching this in his classes. He teaches a class now where he teaches I-Corps principles, and he's applying for an NSF grant that is an interdisciplinary grant addressing multiple areas from technology, but a big emphasis is training graduate students. A key part of his proposal is training our graduate students in these I-Corps principles so that they can learn these and take it forward as well.
Thank you. Dr. Carter.
Yeah, I want to give an example of an undergraduate, because we hadn't heard very many undergraduate stories yet. And I've had students, my site just got funded like this year, so it's just started, but we did some I-Corps classes. I've had students through that, so I'll show an example. One of them is this guy, Suk Singh, who basically had a technology where he had basically was taking kids' handwriting, when they were 4, 5, 6 years old, and allowing them to convert that over to Java code, JavaScript. And he went through the program and realized that the really big need that was there was that teachers don't know how to teach computer programming, right? They have no concept of how to do that, especially at the younger ages. However, they have no problem teaching basic math. So what he was able to do is pivot his company in order to create a product that allowed teachers to teach their kids the basics of JavaScript programming through math, by having them do math work and having them create games and objects and artwork. And he was able to, with no money invested whatsoever, he's expanded now to, I think, 5 or 6 schools in Santa Cruz, bringing in $20,000, $30,000 revenue a month now to keep his company supported, and is looking at growing nationally. And said he did this all just bootstrapped it.
Thanks for sharing your stories, and I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Byer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for introducing us all to this concept and its remarkable success. Dr. Tilbury, Peter Drucker, the famous business writer, said that nothing happens until the sale is made. I was impressed that you point out that this is more about market failure than technical failure. But it's also noted that you said that the entrepreneurial lead in that 3-person team was typically a postdoctoral scholar with a deep commitment to investigating the commercial landscape. I'm trying to think if I've ever known a postdoctoral scholar who knew anything about marketing, sales, service, or the like. Why is that a particularly good person to be the entrepreneurial lead?
And so thank you for your question. It's usually a postdoc or a graduate student who's deeply engaged in the technology. So they're the person in the team that is most deeply understanding of the technology. The faculty advisor has the broader perspective of the technology, and then there's an entrepreneurial mentor, the 3rd person of this 3-person team, and it's the entrepreneurial mentor that will help the team understand what they need to do to make this technology a commercial success. But you need someone on the team who is willing to put in the 40, 60, 80-hour weeks to build the technology and get it out of the lab, make it ready for commercialization.
And Mr. Blank, thank you very much for providing all the intellectual drive for this whole I-Corps movement. You said part of the big thing is how to hire and build teams that know how to sell and market products. That sounds like all of America and all business in general. How do you do that?
Well, I'm going to answer that, but I want to answer your first question.
They're almost the same question.
Yeah, but it's really interesting because if you think about it, you go, wait a minute, why do we have to train those entrepreneurial leads to do this? They should just hire a VP of sales and they're take the tech and go out and sell it. And that's not their skill set, it's someone else's skill set. And it turns out that's where we went wrong. We went wrong because we assumed that just because they had an idea, you could now slap a salesperson on it and sell it. It turns out that almost always their initial idea of who to sell it to, how to package it up, is almost always wrong. And the only people to figure out whether it's wrong or right is not a salesperson, it's actually the technologists themselves. And we've now learned that the initial people who go make the first sales and try to understand that are best done by the technologists. So it's easier to train a technologist to understand customers than it is to train a salesperson to understand deep tech. That's the big light bulb. That's the whole idea here, is wait a minute, let's train the scientists. You know, with all due respect, business can be figured out quicker than you could figure out biotech or some of these arcane sciences. That's the key idea about I-Corps. And in fact, once you train them that this is nothing more than testing guesses or hypotheses, that's what they do in the lab all the time. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. You remind me that I've been selling for more than 40 years, and it was discouraging to realize that I knew all the math I needed to know by third grade to sell. Dr. Tilbury, Dr. Carter talked about she'd seen great diversity in the I-Corps teams themselves, but there is historically huge underrepresentation of women and minorities in startups. Silicon Valley is legendary. So do you use this as a metric from the National Science Foundation, how I-Corps is able to expand diversity?
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, NSF is absolutely committed to broadening participation in all aspects of science and engineering, including in I-Corps. And we have funded some pilot sites that are specifically targeted to increase the representation of women, underrepresented minorities, and people with disabilities in the entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem.
Very cool. And Dr. Chang, who's not a dean or is a dean, you talked about pushing scientists to go beyond the comfort zone, which is once again the challenge for all of us in life. How hard has that been to get people who love to be in labs and think deep thoughts to get out there and talk to real people on the street?
It's extremely challenging. I mean, you know, you can ask any university, the numbers will be about the same, but it's a very small number of faculty who actually want to start a company. You know, maybe it's 5%, maybe 10 perhaps, but to actually start the company. But almost all faculty want to see what they're doing have an impact. And one of the beauties of I-Corps, and Dr. Tilbury kind of talked about it with your question related to the entrepreneurial lead, is it doesn't have to be the faculty member that takes this forward. The faculty member just has to be supportive of the efforts to explore where it can go forward. And so if you've got, as Congressman Lipinski mentioned, only half of PhD students entering academic fields, what are the other half going to do? Well, if they can explore these opportunities to find it out, where can the sale be made, they aren't actually necessarily tasked with the ones at the end of the day closing the sale, but if they can identify where the sales can be made and shape the direction of the technology development. I mean, some of our most successful I-Corps stories, they went through I-Corps 3 years ago because what they learned fundamentally changed not their core expertise, but the direction that they were going to apply it. And it took a long time to build that technology. And you can imagine over 3 years being slightly off course where they'd end up 3 years later. So, you know, I think for faculty, just kind of thinking about it may not be you, but your research is going to have a greater impact, and you want to help your students find jobs, and if half of them aren't going to be in academia, this is a great way to help your students find jobs.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask, do you have a percentage of women who are participating in the program?
I don't have that number at my fingertips, but I could get that for you.
Okay, because I'd be interested in that and overall diversity, as well as what is done to recruit in particular to help those numbers, to get more in the pipeline. Because I know I've had a young women's leadership program that I've just run informally in the summer, and we've had to very aggressively recruit to make sure we are getting you know, young women from different communities that maybe their parents aren't saying, hey, why don't you do this? You know, and we're reaching kids in junior high and high school, so we're really trying to get them into a leadership program that opens up, you know, just some exposure for them to other women leaders and to ideas. But we really have to go into particular communities to kind of pull them out. And so I just would be interested in what methods you might use to enhance that and make sure that they are participating in a program like this.
So thank you. I think that's one of the purposes of these pilot sites that we have that are focused specifically on trying to increase the representation of women or minorities or disabled people in entrepreneurship. So that's their focus, and we'll look forward to seeing their successes.
Okay, and it would just be helpful if we could get some of those numbers too, because it makes sure and best practices that might apply for us in other areas. So thank you. And I now recognize Mr. Banks for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to each of you for being here. This has been an enlightening discussion for me, learning more about I-Corps. I wonder, though, to start with Dr. Tilbury, as the curriculum has been developed and the program has been launched, how can the private sector invest more and take on more responsibility for sustaining the program?
So thank you. I think there is an opportunity for the private sector. Many people who participate in the teams, the entrepreneurial mentors, come from the private sector. Most of the programs are offered through universities, and some of them have partnerships with private sector to fund those programs. So I think there's many different opportunities. I don't have a...
So there are mechanisms for the private sector to invest their own funding that can already occur?
I think through the universities would be the way to go. Do you have another...
I was just going to add, so the SBIR program, for instance, I-Corps has started to be used, actually not started, it's been a couple years now, it's been incorporated into the SBIR Phase 1 awardees from NSF, and that's been transformational for the program, but also, as I understand it, there's a Phase 2B component of that SBIR program where not only do you get funding from NSF, but it's a side-by-side investment with a private institution. So you're sort of meeting halfway because the technology still needs to be developed, and you're kind of sharing that risk. And if it ends up where you think it will, now the private company that was a partner in that is going to go all in.
And I can tell you what we do. Our center, except the exception of the NSF I-Corps site, our center is completely privately funded. We get donations from alumni and various people in the community who really want to see our students be successful and move forward. We also introduced something known as the Founders Pledge, which basically allows, it's no firm commitment, but basically says if these students go off and do really well and make money, that they will commit giving money back to the program that we can use to then support future students. So I see this being self-supporting.
And if I can, I should maybe circle this back to the intent of I-Corps Go. The current I-Corps NSF program funds universities and university nodes. The intent of I-Corps Go is take this great, great curriculum and open it up to the larger community, and that would allow funding to go directly from private capital into these startups, which not necessarily would be deep tech. Remember, the NSF program is essentially for these orphaned technologies that have a hard time crossing this ditch of death between government basic science funding and private capital who wanted to see something more advanced. I-Corps Go would actually expand it to a much greater community with a proven curriculum that actually works well.
Okay. So do you think, in light of that, do you think that startup companies would see value in spending their own capital, their own money, to go through the training if it were available to them?
I'd say absolutely. That's what Dr. Carter said.
I would have paid for it, yeah. No problem.
Okay, so we all agree with that. Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, and I now recognize Ms. Bonamici for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Comstock, and thank you to the witnesses. I regret I was not able to hear you deliver your testimony. There's an education committee happening at the same time, and I'm trying to be more than one place at once. But I did read the testimony with interest. I represent Northwest Oregon, and we have certainly a lot of tech startups and accelerators and a lot of incubators, and this is a really interesting topic to me. I wanted to start, Dr. Tilbury, you cited some data in your testimony about companies that were formed and then funding for teams that have been through the I-Corps curriculum. So what is the full extent of the data that you have on outcomes? Are there data that you're in the process of collecting so that we could know what metrics we should be using for a full understanding of the return on investment in I-Corps?
So thank you. There is absolutely data collection ongoing. I believe through the AICA Act, we have a biannual reporting to Congress. So sometime within a year, or I think January of 2019. Correct. So we are collecting data as much as we can to understand. Many of the startups that are that are coming out of NSF-funded basic research are in this deep technology area that Mr. Blank mentioned. And they might take 5 or even 10 years to show the results of their company. It's not just writing software. You have to build something and maybe build a manufacturing plant to make it. And so these time lanes are much longer than you might expect to see in something that's starting an app for a smartphone.
Of course. Right. Thank you. So to the whole panel, you know, our U.S. universities continue to lead the world in basic research and in education. I just want to note, as we're in the midst of discussion about the tax reform bills, that there are provisions that are of great concern to our universities, particularly the treating tuition waivers as taxable income. Our universities are very, very concerned about that, and I hope that when the conference committee meets, they get the message that that's going to set us back as a leader in innovation and research. In some cases, universities can be slow to change and adapt to emerging challenges and opportunities. I came from our state legislature, and I know that some of that happens. So where do things stand now with respect to the sort of cultural and institutional obstacles to expanding the entrepreneurial culture at universities, and how has I-Corps helped, you know, model some of the changes that even in the last few years, there were lessons could be learned at the university level, and what steps can federal agencies and institutions themselves take to continue to expand entrepreneurship without compromising the critical mission in research and education? Start with Mr. Blank.
If I can, I think that's a great question, and the insight I'll offer with a smile is that in universities, I-Corps is typically offered in the engineering school, not the business school, which is a big idea. You know, one would have thought that business schools would have led with this type of entrepreneurial education, but in fact, business schools historically have been focused on large corporations and the execution of a current business model, and that is how to make current corporations better. And so for 100 years, that's what business schools did. But this idea of innovation and entrepreneurship in the engineering school was actually a new idea, and in fact, is kind of the breakthrough that's happened in the last 6 years with I-Corps, is that the engineering is actually now leading the thought leaders in the country for innovation and entrepreneurship.
Also, I'd like to add to that. So my job at the University of Maryland 5 years ago, I was appointed by the president to aspirationally engage all 37,000 of our students in innovation and entrepreneurship, and that's an impossible task. But
a good challenge.
But a good challenge, and I'll say that the I-Corps principles that we teach to startups, those are exactly the same methods and principles I've used in that mission, and that's the only way to succeed, because at the end of the day, we teach our startups, you have to figure out where people spend their time and their money, and you need to go to where they are and offer a better solution in the way that they're doing things, because it's hard to change behavior. That's even more so at colleges and universities. And so the places where students are, let's just focus on the students for the moment, they're taking general education courses, they're taking the prereqs for their major, they're taking their required upper level, junior and senior level courses. So embedding it, and initially whether it's in engineering or even in other majors as we've started to do, embedding these kinds of methods and principles in those courses are the way to spread it, because going and asking for more funding or more volunteers or more whatever is not going to get you as far. And the same thing is true on the faculty side, and faculty are motivated by gaining tenure. They publish in journals, respected journals, and go to conferences. So we need to weave in innovation and entrepreneurship into things they have to do along the tenure path.
Thank you. And in my remaining few seconds, I just want to mention that this Congress, in the last Congress, passed the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is the rewrite of No Child Left Behind. So at the K-12 level, there are attempts being made to make sure that students get a more well-rounded education, and hopefully we are educating before they get to college and university students to be more creative and innovative. And we've seen that in schools that, for example, are adopting STEAM rather than STEM, and integrating the arts and making sure that people can think creatively and communicate about what they're creating. So hopefully when students get to colleges and universities, they will be more able to have that well-rounded approach and communicate what they are in fact inventing. So there are efforts to start earlier to make sure that we have a more creative and innovative workforce. So thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, and I thank our very esteemed and knowledgeable witnesses for their testimony, for your experience, for your wisdom, and how we can really make this innovative field grow. So it's very exciting, and look forward to continuing to work with you. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional written comments and written questions from members, and this hearing is now adjourned.